Spring 1943. The Nazis were bracing for invasion. The Allies needed a breakthrough. Something bold, something brilliant. What they unleashed was a corpse. Not a soldier, not a spy. Just a dead man carrying a briefcase stuffed with lies. But those lies would fool Hitler himself and help turn the tide of World War II. This is the unbelievable true story of Operation Mincemeat. By 1943, the Allies had driven the Germans out of North Africa. But this victory created a new, terrifying problem. From the shores of Tunis, they could see Europe, but it was a fortress. To win the war, they had to break in, but where? The coast of France was a wall of concrete and steel, the Atlantic Wall. A direct assault would be a massacre. The only logical next step, the one every general on both sides knew was coming, was an invasion of Sicily. It was the perfect stepping stone into Italy, the so-called soft underbelly of Europe. And that was the problem. It was too perfect. The Germans knew it, and they were waiting. The island was commanded by the respected Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, a master of defensive warfare. Its beaches were mined, its cliffs were lined with machine gun nests, and elite panzer divisions, including the formidable Hermann Göring division, were ready to drive any invasion back into the sea. Allied planners, using the cold calculus of war, estimated that a direct assault could cost them over 100,000 casualties. It would be a bloodbath. The Allies didn't need a bigger army, they needed a better lie. The task fell to a small, secretive group known as the 20 Committee, named after the Roman numerals for 20, a double cross. They were a collection of Britain's most eccentric and brilliant minds, operating from the drab, unassuming offices of MI5. Their job was to turn captured German spies into double agents and feed a steady stream of nonsense to the Nazi war machine. At the heart of this committee were two men, an unlikely pairing who would become the architects of the grand deception. Ewan Montagu, a sharp, meticulous King's Counsel and naval intelligence officer. He was a man of logic and law. And Charles Cholmeley, a lanky, eccentric flight lieutenant from the Royal Air Force with a wild imagination and a passion for tinkering with gadgets. Montagu was the realist, and Charles Cholmeley was the dreamer. Together, they were about to cook up an idea so bizarre, so morbid, it just might work. The idea was not entirely new. It originated as a footnote in a memo written by another intelligence officer, a man who would later become famous for creating James Bond. Ian Fleming, personal assistant to the Director of Naval Intelligence, had compiled a list of outlandish ideas for deceiving the enemy. It was called the Trout Memo, named after a book on trout fishing because, as Fleming noted, a trout fisherman casts his fly over the likely spots, but is never sure what he will catch. Suggestion number 28 was to plant misleading papers on a dead body, dressed as an officer, and let it wash ashore for the enemy to find. At the time, it was dismissed as impractical, even ghoulish. But now, with hundreds of thousands of lives on the line, Cholmeley resurrected the idea. The unworkable suddenly seemed necessary. Their plan was simple in concept, but impossibly complex in execution. They would find a body, invent a life for it, and turn a dead man into the most important messenger in the world. They would call it Operation Mincemeat. The first problem was the most macabre. They needed a body, not just any body. It had to be a man who looked like he had died at sea, drowned or from hypothermia, with no other signs of trauma. And most importantly, he needed to have no family who would come looking for him and ask difficult questions. Montagu and Cholmeley scoured the records of London's dead, a grim and desperate search through the city's morgues. They consulted with Sir Bernard Spilsbury, Britain's most celebrated pathologist, who warned them that most corpses would show obvious signs of their true cause of death. A man who died of a heart attack would have no water in his lungs. A man who truly drowned would have fought for his life, showing bruises. They needed a very specific kind of tragedy. After weeks of searching, they found him, Glyndwr Michael, a 34-year-old homeless man, a victim of the Great Depression, who had died in a derelict warehouse after ingesting rat poison. The poison, a phosphorus-based paste often spread on bread as bait, had caused a slow, agonizing death, but crucially, it had filled his lungs with fluid, a condition that Spilsbury confirmed would be consistent with drowning. He had no known relatives. He was the perfect, tragic candidate. A man who had been invisible in life would become indispensable in death. They kept the body in cold storage at the Hackney mortuary, under the guise of waiting for relatives who would never appear. Next, they had to give this ghost a soul. They named him Captain, Acting Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. But a man is more than a name, he is the life he lives. And so, they began to build that life through the items they would plant in his pockets. This was the pocket litter, and it was here that the deception became art. They knew German intelligence would be meticulous, so they had to be even more so. They gave him an ID card, using a photo of a handsome MI5 officer who resembled the deceased. They added ticket stubs from a London theater, but to make him feel real, they gave him problems. A stern letter from Lloyd's Bank, demanding payment for an overdraft. A letter from his father, expressing disapproval of his choice of fiancée. They even included a receipt for a diamond engagement ring. These weren't just props, they were character traits, and most importantly, they gave him a heart. They created a fiancée named Pam, complete with a photograph of an MI5 clerk and 2 passionate love letters filled with inside jokes and future plans. One even contained a loose eyelash for good luck, a touch of pure humanity designed to convince any spy that this was a real man. Finally, the centerpiece. A briefcase containing official-looking letters between 2 British generals. The letters were masterpieces of forgery, written on the correct stationery and signed with practiced hands. Tucked inside was the poison pill, a casual mention that while they were going to fake an attack on Sicily, the real targets were Greece and Sardinia. The lie was complete. Major Martin was no longer a corpse. He was a man in love, slightly in debt, and carrying the most important secrets of the war. The body was dressed in a full Royal Marines uniform, and his boots were scuffed to show wear. The entire team took turns wearing the ID card to give it a worn look. Once ready, Major Martin was sealed in a special steel canister, packed with dry ice, and labeled "Handle with Care Optical Instruments." On April 30th, 1943, the British submarine HMS Seraph surfaced in the dead of night off the coast of Huelva, Spain, a town chosen specifically because it was home to a ruthlessly efficient German spy. They gently lowered the body of Major Martin into the water. They recited Psalm 39, then pushed the briefcase in after him. The submarine submerged, leaving the ghost to its fate. Hours later, a Spanish fisherman found the body. The news traveled fast. The British, feigning panic, sent frantic telegrams demanding the return of the briefcase, which only made the Germans more desperate to see what was inside. A local German agent, with the help of sympathetic Spanish officers, managed to get the letters, photograph them, and send the film racing to Berlin. The briefcase and its contents were then returned to the British, who could see from a cleverly placed eyelash inside one of the letters that the documents had indeed been opened. The photographs landed on the desk of Adolf Hitler himself. His intelligence officers debated their authenticity. Was it a plant? It seemed too good to be true, but then they looked closer. The overdraft notice, the ticket stubs, the passionate, heartfelt letters from his fiancée. No one, they concluded, would go to such elaborate, humanizing lengths for a deception. It had to be real. Hitler was convinced. He overruled his own generals in Italy, who were certain the attack was coming at Sicily. He issued a direct order. Measures regarding Sardinia and the Peloponnese are to take precedence over everything else. Entire panzer divisions were rerouted. A whole fleet of torpedo boats was moved from Sicily to the Greek islands. The German war machine turned to face a phantom army, leaving the real target dangerously exposed. On July 9th, 1943, the Allies invaded Sicily. The landings were a stunning success. The defenders were caught completely off guard, and the island fell in just 38 days, with far fewer casualties than anyone had dared to hope. The gateway to Europe was open. Operation Mincemeat was a stunning success, a testament to the idea that in war, the cleverest weapon isn't always a bomb. Sometimes it's a perfectly crafted story. It's a lesson that echoes today, in an age where digital ghosts and sophisticated disinformation can shape the modern battlefield. before a single shot is ever fired. It proves that the ink on the vellum can be as mighty as the sword.